You mean in terms of the fact that the NHS is not in a good state whatsoever. On the debate desk, Reem Ibrahim and Jonny Gould on this particular issue. I mean, lots of people in touch. What do you make of it, Reem?
It's absolutely awful, and I think that these particularly personal stories portray just how bad the situation is with the National Health Service. In the last year before COVID in 2019, the UK had the second highest avoidable mortality rates in all of Western Europe. So we are not just bad by our own standards, but healthcare in this country is actually killing people. It means that people that could avoid mortality are not. I think we have to have those honest conversations, and to be fair to this government, they've been having those honest conversations much more significantly than I think any previous government has. I think majority of the time it's actually because it's politically possible, right? If Labour come in and say we're going to sell off parts of the NHS, we're going to reform the NHS, no one accuses them of privatisation.
Even though that's what it is.
Even though that is what it is. However, when the Conservatives even touch the National Health Service or try and reform it, they're accused of
being told it was going to be sold off to the United States. I wonder, in regard to exactly what you're saying, Reem, that's a good thing to have the conversation, but nonetheless, do we know what the problems are? I mean, Wes Streeting, talking to the Health Secretary, for England anyway, talking about saying, oh, we need to have a national conversation with the NHS. No, we don't. You know, waiting times, GPs appointments, waiting in corridors. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? It is.
It does seem obvious. However, I think that the conversation about what healthcare system we actually need does need to happen. And I think that the British public also need to wake up and sort of look in the mirror and see what the National Health Service is at the moment. It is a socialist healthcare system.
But we're never going to change from healthcare free at the point of use in this country.
I think we can. I think that actually, if we look at all other European countries, I think the Netherlands is a really good example of that. The government don't own any of the hospitals. They're all owned privately, and it's through competition and choice that people are able to choose where they get their healthcare from. I think those kind of competitive models of healthcare are much significantly better. But it's also doesn't mean that anybody goes without healthcare. It doesn't mean that if you're too poor and you can't afford healthcare provision that you don't get that. There is always going to be that safety net. And I actually think that we need to wake up and get rid of this socialist government-created monopoly that is the NHS.
Jonny, what do you think of the fact that we are advertising for nurses to specifically work in corridors?
It doesn't solve the wider problem. And again, a national conversation just kicks the can to the future. We're going to have these anecdotal stories about people dying on stretchers 36 hours into A&E. Basically, they are putting pressure, the surgeries, onto A&E, and it's creating this terrible problem. I've had problems in A&E, and the nurses are not capable of really dealing with the full plethora of problems. It depends on the on-duty doctor. There was one situation where I was involved, where the response was absolutely world class. It's a complete lottery. But chucking money at this and chucking money at nurses in corridors doesn't fix a huge problem. A national conversation when there are 300 questions to answer doesn't solve the problem.
And what does it say when you have, right, we're recruiting you specifically to work in a corridor, we're putting in extra PowerPoints, for example, for equipment, we're putting in, you know, oxygen lines and things like that, in a corridor. You might say, well, look, if it was a big room or something that was just an A&E overspill, it wouldn't matter and people wouldn't bat an eyelid. But actually, when it comes to the corridor care that people are on, a nurses actually being recruited for that, what does that say, Jonny?
It says that they're not actually fixing the problem at the source. We need to do that. And in other countries, there is an insurance-based, non-socialist approach to universal healthcare. In some countries, there are competing insurance companies where you can make a choice. And indeed, if you want to be partially covered with private, you can have an extra pillow on top of your National Health Service as well. And, you know, those countries are smaller. Obviously, this is a problem of a country where we don't actually know the population exactly of the country that we're in, 65 million or so, maybe more. But I've got no confidence in this government to solve what is essentially a growing socialist problem. We need to grasp this huge set of questions. What are the questions? and how can we solve it, and how can we lower taxes?
I think you're absolutely right. And the fact that we're spending huge amounts of money on the NHS, we spend just below £200 billion a year on the NHS. We are expected to see the NHS budget increase over the next year to go above £200 billion in a single year. So the solution is not more money. Let's be very clear about this. The NHS is not underfunded. If anything, it's overfunded. What we actually need is a fundamental restructuring of the system. I think Johnny's absolutely right. We need a social health insurance model. We've seen them replicated across mainland Europe, and they have done excellent things when it comes to competitive. So it means that different providers are competing with each other. It means that you, as an individual, get to choose where you get your healthcare from. If you don't like one provider, you go somewhere else. Within the NHS, we don't have that choice.
Well, Wes Streeting has just announced that you can have a choice of 5 different hospitals to have your care in, so there is some element of choice.
And I actually think that I think that Wes Streeting's reforms, and I won't say much good about this government, I think, when it comes to the economy, but on the NHS, it's the one good thing I think they actually have done. It's one step closer towards some competition and choice. What I would like to see is that hospitals be actually owned and catered to by the private sector, rather than it still being on the NHS. However, this is one good step.
Final word from Jonny on this?
I've noticed there's some anecdotal outsourcing going on already in this tyranny, in this world of tyranny. If you've noticed how your workers' rights have declined rapidly over the last 10 years or so, it's because corporate and social care has outsourced almost everything. And even I'm being referred to private companies now because our doctors don't always know that they're referring you to a sort of private outsourced part. So the NHS is being outsourced, whether Wes Streeting has decided it or not.
So you might as well privatise the whole system in the first place.
Sue in Cambridge says the NHS should be depoliticised and privatised, funded by insurance. Elizabeth says corridor nursing care has been used in my local hospital in Craigavon as the norm since COVID time, so it's nothing new. Craigavon in Northern Ireland, in fact, that is the hospital I was born in, Craigavon Area Hospital, as the norm since COVID time, so it's nothing new. You're lucky if you can get in an ambulance if you need one. We also, this is quite a good one from Eddie. He says you could coin a new phrase of corridors. A number of people reacting as well to to Abdul, who we had on earlier on, the councillor from Oldham. Jackie says, well done, Peter, for having an Oldham councillor on who articulated the mistrust of the Labour councillor well by the residents. However, yet again, he was evasive when asked about why these men do this, which is part of the problem. We'll be talking about that more a little bit later on in the programme, so stay tuned for that. Robin Dorset says a good start to avoid any possible persecution of Muslims is for the decent, peace-loving and law-abiding Muslims to stand up to the extremist followers of Islam and say no, raping and killing of anyone, least of all children, is disgusting and unacceptable. Mel Stride is the Shadow Chancellor. He also has spoken to Sky News this morning. Neither man had time to speak to us. We did ask them, but Mel Stride spoke to Sky News, and this is what he said on the Tulip Siddiq allegations.
What is not right is that the Prime Minister is not moving her out of that position and getting her to step down, because she is the anti-corruption minister. She has serious charges laid against her now, or serious accusations that around corruption, and it's going to be really impossible for her to do that job under current circumstances, so she should step down, and the Prime Minister needs to get a grip of that.
Let's keep all three of us out of court on this one and stay on the right side of the line, as I'm sure we all will. But Reem and Jonny here on the debate desk. Just a quick reaction to that, Jonny.
She'll go and then they'll bring her back later, because that's what Labour governments do.
The tulip will rebloom.
Exactly, in season.
Also what Conservative governments have done. I mean, I think the first example that comes to mind is Priti Patel, who forcibly had to resign as a result of her
with a different Prime Minister, though.
With a different Prime Minister, but I'm just saying it's not just Labour government that do this. It's of course.
But I'm thinking Mandy keeps bouncing back.
Well, he's going to be the US ambassador, despite having resigned twice. He's going to be the ambassador of the United States. The interesting thing as well, Louise Haigh, let's remember, the Transport Secretary, thrown under a bus by Keir Starmer, pun intentional. I mean, he dealt with her quite quickly, but there are allegations that Tulip Siddiq is being dealt with slightly differently because they're BFFs, they're constituency neighbours and proper friends as well.
I think it makes sense for Starmer politically to want to keep his allies close, and of course within his own cabinet he's going to want people that are loyal to him, and if it's a fact that him and Tulip are actually very, very good friends and are much more loyal to one another and much closer, actually it makes sense that Starmer does keep somebody like that on side. I do, and again, like, we are trying to keep ourselves out of court here. However, it is really interesting. Of course, we don't know what the details of the story are. If it is the case that she is connected directly to corruption in Bangladesh, I think it does serve a huge amount of problems. It almost doesn't matter how true it actually is. What matters is how it looks. And it kind of feels as though there is an element of corruption coming from the government. Of course, we don't know how true any of this is. But when we add this to the Lord Alley scandal, and we add this to the various other issues that we've seen over the course of the last 6 months since the election, this does not bode well, and it kind of just smells bad, doesn't it?
Just to reiterate, Tulip Siddiq says she's done nothing wrong, and she has referred herself to the Independent Standards Commissioner for Ministerial Interests. We will see what happens there. Right then, let's talk about another person who's no great fan of Keir Starmer, and that is Dominic Cummings. He is allegedly involved with Elon Musk in a plot to sabotage UK politics. He is apparently, according to the Mail on Sunday, helping orchestrate the Tesla billionaire's attacks on Keir Starmer, according to government sources. Labour would say this, wouldn't they?
They would, wouldn't they? I tell you something, though. Dominic Cummings has stepped up to the plate and said, you know what? In Britain, we haven't got enough right-wing parties. That's what he said.
Definitely need another one.
No, I'm going to set one up called the Startup Party. And
what happens if you get like 5 years in? It's not the start. It's like New Labour. You know, what should you call New Labour?
It's not really new, 10 years
it's
in.
Not new anymore. I had always thought it should have been called Labour Gold.
Labour Gold!
That's right.
Labour 2.0.
That's right.
I think this is so interesting, and I've got to say I'm a big fan of Dominic Cummings. I think that he absolutely understands the fundamental problem with the state. However, he threw his toys out the pram when things didn't go his way. I think if he stuck by Boris Johnson and he actually stuck by the Conservative government over the last few years, things would have actually turned out a lot more different.
I don't think much option towards the end.
Well, indeed.
Peter Kyle is the Science Secretary. He spoke to Sky News this morning about Elon Musk and actually specifically about the monitoring of Elon Musk and those tweets. This is what Peter Kyle had to say.
My department does not monitor individuals, but it does monitor the internet itself for trends in misinformation and trends in harmful content. We have legislation which protects people. Illegal content on the internet must be taken down. None of the rights and protections and safety features that we have now baked into our online activity are up for negotiation.
Okay, well, he didn't quite address it head on, certainly when he was asked about it. But I mean, Reem, well, Jonny, actually, what do you make of the thought, the suggestion anyway? We'll probably never know whether it's true or not that Dominic Cummings is involved in all of this.
Well, I hope he is actually, because we need a progressive voice on the right. To contact with Elon Musk beyond Nigel Farage. Apparently everything's all right between the two of them now.
It's all been worked out.
It's all been calmed down. But apparently Dominic Cummings was busy on WhatsApp while he was in Number 10 with Boris. He frequently WhatsApps his main man in Texas or wherever Elon's lair is these days. But, you know,
he is a little bit Bond villain.
He is, isn't he? I quite like it.
I'm looking forward to the polls in sort of 3.75 years' time. I'm using that kind of digital analysis because that's Dominic Cummings' way.
Of course.
And the polls will be Labour 19%, the Tories 18%, Reform 20%, Startup Party 20%, and everyone will have to come together and there will be a Conservative, Unionist, Reform and Startup Party coalition, a rainbow of the right, who will then finally beat Starmer as one-term, two-tier Starmer, and that's where we'll be.
I think that might be where we are. I really? Maybe.
I'm not sure.
I would really love to meet Dominic Cummings. I think he's such a star. I mean, the fact that...
I've met him numerous times, including when he sacked me.
Oh, he sacked you? Well, when you were a special advisor?
Yes.
Oh, that's quite funny. Maybe he didn't think you were very good.
Wasn't funny at the time. No, he didn't, clearly, although I sometimes wear it as a badge of honour. Do you know what? I saw him at a wedding a few months later. It was all fine. We had a lovely chat and everything. You know, politics. That's politics. That's what happens.
Very good. Well, I think that he fundamentally understands the problems with the state at the moment. The state is too big. It's too bureaucratic. We've got too many middle managers. I think he really understands that actually a free market is really the way forward when it comes to the economics.
He's an ideological brother of Musk, isn't he?
He is. You know. And actually, Musk once tweeted about Frederick Hayek, who is my favourite economist, and it's this entire idea that the government is just too big, and I think he gets that. We've also got to remember we largely have Dominic Cummings to thank for Brexit. I mean, he is really...
It wouldn't have happened without him.
It wouldn't have happened without him.
No doubt about that.
He led vote leave. He basically meant it, so it made it so that actually Brexiteers weren't just seen as Nigel Farage, who at the time was seen as on the radical side of the right, although now he definitely isn't. But without Dominic Cummings, we wouldn't have been able to win the EU referendum, and we would not be out of the EU.
He got Brexit done. He got Brexit done. There is no doubt about that, and I don't think it would have happened without him. Either the referendum or the actual implementation. Although many people say the implementation wasn't quite what they wanted. Thank you to everyone. There's quite a lot of praise for the two of you, actually. Alan says, "Fab show. Had to turn the colour down on my TV due to Johnny's shirt." Says Alan in Mill Hill. So yeah.
Cheers, Alan.
And Sharon says, "Good morning. I do think Reem Ibrahim is amazing. She tells it like it is. She's absolutely right. I think we need to get rid of the NHS and stop dishing out billions for it. It is just not going to work." Says that's Sharon in Staffordshire there. And thank you to Amanda in London, who says, "You can tell when the left are rattled. They are now taking aim at Nigel Farage and Reform UK. Interesting times," Amanda says. And actually, thank you to Sandy Tregent, who has been in touch on Twitter yesterday over the councillors who have resigned, as Sandy correctly said, and we did try to reflect it on the programme, but perhaps I didn't quite get it right yesterday. You don't get everything right in broadcasting, but certainly there's a lot to that story, certainly of those councillors who have resigned, about 12 councillors, and actually Zia Youssef, who is the chairman of Reform UK, did a very interesting Twitter thread on his view of what happened anyway, which I'd highly recommend reading, and Sandy brought that to my attention, so thank you to her for that, and I'm happy to hopefully sort of clear that up. Speaking of things that are clear, car headlights. Sean says, "I do Uber Eats and just get deliveries in my car to earn extra money." Inspired by your very own Kevin O'Sullivan. That's right, Kevin did that, that's right. "When another driver looms up behind me with these lights, it's like something out of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I think some of them are illegal as well," says Sean in Bicester. Sean, you're absolutely right, actually, because there are people, there's a sort of black market of people getting much brighter lights as well, also the new cars. We'll get into that with Reem and Johnny in just a second. We'll talk about those paedophile gangs as well, because we're going to talk about this throughout the programme, and also the NHS. Anything you want to talk about, give me a shout. Bill in Romsey has sent this message, says, "Good morning, Peter. We don't have enough beds in hospitals. To stop the beds being blocked and the ambulances being held up, every county build a 300-bed overspill hospital for what is required. It can take patients who need care, then they can sort out a care package, take pressure off the hospitals." Clearly, this, as you say, is a massive issue. Graham says, "Regarding the recruitment of corridor nurses, it means two things: admissions of failure and an admission of defeat." Anne in Midwheel says, "Scrap the NHS, other alternatives are available. Make private healthcare and insurance tax deductible. Stop treating foreigners for free, no insurance, no entry. Remove the extra population who shouldn't be there. Is it 10 million? Is it 20 million? We don't know. There, public consultation in 4 points." Interesting one from Penny in Essex as well, who says, "Why on earth is Rachel Reeves cozying up to China? She's far too thick and will give all manner of private information to a country that hates the West. The inmates are running the asylum," says Penny in Essex. Well, actually, Labour, of course, bet the farm really on growth. They said they wanted 2.5% growth in the economy. They're not going to get it. Borrowing costs have gone up as well. There's many problems on the bond market. This was another aspect that Peter Kyle, the Science Secretary, was asked about on Sky. Let's see what he had to say, and then we'll ask our debate desk members, Johnny and Reem, about this.
The Chancellor has set that spending envelope. It is within the fiscal rules. Those fiscal rules are not going to change. They're not going to be broken. This country will be returned to the financial stability for which Britain is always known until the Conservatives came in and trashed our economy. You know the government doesn't comment on the ins and outs and the ups and downs of
I'm not asking you to comment.
I agree with Ed Conway, who is your economics editor and reporter, who said that what's happening in this country is very in line with what we're seeing in like-minded countries, in particular in the United States.
It's interesting, actually, Darren Jones as well, who is the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Rachel Reeves' deputy, said these bond market things, it's all what happens. Well, we've got an economist with us, and that is Reem Ibrahim on the debate desk along with Jonny Gould. Reem, should we be worried?
Absolutely. I mean, the OBR at the time of the budget predicted...
Office of Budgetary Responsibility.
Office of Budgetary Responsibility predicted that GDP growth would be about 2% in 2025. Now that's looking like that's a pretty optimistic estimate.
And still not 2.5%.
Yeah, it definitely won't be 2.5%. We're also sort of looking at the end of last year, and it's probably very likely that the economy actually shrank at the end of last year. We probably saw that happen. So I think what's really interesting about this in its entirety is Rachel Reeves is talking about wanting economic growth. She really did not leave herself a lot of fiscal headroom when it came to the budget at the end of last year. And actually, we're at a position now where 6 months after the election, the government might actually have to break their own fiscal rules.
And only 11 weeks after a budget as well. It's meant to be with a budget. I mean, having been in government, it's like you want to almost get away with it. You want to sort of say a couple of days later, OK, that's all fine, nothing to see here, move on. But here we are, weeks on, Rachel Reeves in China, talking about £600 million of investment from them, looking to China to try to get the investment, the growth that just isn't going to happen, apparently, within this economy, Jonny.
That's right. My instinct with this budget was they are loading taxation on top of regulation, and it's like a double whammy. You know, the government can't institute additional regulation and then increase taxation because people will divest. Where I was in this economy now has completely changed. I felt like I can't invest here in the way that I used to. I don't know how I'm going to invest in the future, but the factors here that they want to go for, which is growth based upon property and deregulation of house building, for example, is something I just don't believe.
I think it's absolutely
too difficult. It's too decentralised, isn't it? It's too difficult.
You can invest in me, Jonny. I'm a good investment. I said this to Rishi Sunak when I worked with him. It was like £1 million to you is not a lot of money. To me, it's actually a lot.
It's a big investment. That is true. I think the problem here
What's
is
your
actually
return?
0%.
0%. It's actually minus. It all goes down.
Minus £1 million.
Minus $1 million. I think the problem here, Peter, is actually that the government don't understand how you actually achieve economic growth. I mean, we saw with the national insurance contributions rises in the budget in October, the government increasing the cost for employing people. So effectively what they've done is they've said, OK, we're not going to tax working people, we're actually going to tax employers. But in reality, that money is of course going to come from working people. It means that there are going to be less job opportunities. It means that we're probably going to see lower wages, or indeed less wage increases, or in some instances actually some job losses. Okay. I think we have to be very clear about this. The way we achieve economic growth is not through more government, it's through less. It's through the government staying out of it and allowing the private sector to do its thing. The way we achieve economic growth is through deregulation and lower taxes. We need a more competitive economic system, and this government just doesn't seem to get it.
They're the opposite.
They are absolutely the opposite. Okay. They also want to intervene wholeheartedly, which I think is absolutely wrong.
Let's talk about gangs, paedophile gangs, rape gangs, whatever you want to call them. I don't particularly like the phrase grooming gangs personally, because they're not grooming people, they're raping, and they're doing even at least, if not more, horrendous things to young girls. And we've been talking about this for a number of days now, really since Elon Musk retweeted and made a number of very serious allegations against Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister. And a little bit earlier on in the programme, if you're watching, about 45 minutes ago, I spoke to Councillor Abdul Wahid. He's an independent councillor in Oldham. And in a few minutes' time, I'm going to talk to someone else about the perhaps cultural problem here, actually. Momus Najmi is a writer and commentator. And interestingly, Nigel Farage today accusing Wes Streeting of covering up the truth of grooming gangs. That's in reaction to an interview that the Health Secretary did with The Guardian yesterday, and news about a Labour MP who rejected calls for a local grooming inquiry that identified more than 1,000 victims. We're about 11 or 12 days into this story. People are still really angry about this, Jonny.
Oh, it's awful, and this is not new news. It's rehashed, decade-old news.
But it's still happening.
This is
still happening.
Andrew Norfolk's story.
Yeah, in 2011 in the Times, when he first really properly wrote about it.
When they talk about Rotherham, they forgot to mention Oxford and Telford and Rochdale and other places.
Oldham,
I was with a family on New Year's Eve. They were put together on our table, and they said, we're from Blackburn. And I said, there are some terrible integration problems there, aren't they? And she said, yes, we grew up, me and my husband, in Blackburn. We have moved to an outlying village because it's 90% Pakistani and Bangladeshi now, and I want my infant boy to be away from being sold drugs. We have moved to a village to safeguard the upbringing of our child. How very sad is that? And said the only people left who are originally from Blackburn in those streets now are the elderly. So there are huge demographic problems that have been created beyond the actual rape allegations and
problem that's there.
The society has been fundamentally ruined and changed. Luton, parts of Birmingham, it's literally across the country. It is the Wild West, and no one seems to be solving those wider issues as well.
On a lawlessness, on a lack of British values being perpetuated. I'm not saying for a second that simply because you're an immigrant you can't adopt British values. Of course you can. We have many immigrants who do that. We've many who are totally law-abiding people, second, third generation. We've got one sitting in front of us here, Reem, and that it is still an issue. It is a massive issue, and it's a cultural issue within Islam as well. And where are their community leaders? That's what I want to know.
I was just about to say that, actually. I think that what's really important now, what's absolutely pertinent, is that those Islamic community leaders, those sheikhs, they come out and they actually condemn what's been happening in the strongest terms.
But they don't, do they? Why don't they?
They don't. I don't know. I mean, there have been a few that have, but not in the way they should be. And I think that there is an element of fear. I must say, I think a lot of those community leaders are afraid that their own community will reject them, that they are betraying their own community. I think there are a lot of worries that actually these kind of conversations, I think Wes Streeting has mentioned this, that it stirs up more hatred than there needs to be. I think that ultimately we've got to be honest about what's happened and the consequences of which I think are, I mean, I would be the first person on the street to protest this. I actually am of the view that if all of this had happened, and, you know, the conversations on X, but also Elon Musk calling it out as well, if all of this had happened in the summer, there would have been riots. I actually think that because it happened in the winter...
So Wes Streeting is right?
I think Wes Streeting is correct to say that there will be, you know, consequences, and there probably will be an increase in Islamophobic hate crimes, etc. But I don't think that's. I think that's pretty irrelevant in this situation. Okay. We need to be absolutely honest about what's happening, and I cannot believe the government haven't accepted a national inquiry. Yeah. We have to know what's happening.
We'll see what they do, and we'll be speaking to Momus Najmi, a writer and commentator, about this in a second. Loads of messages coming in about the NHS in particular. Brian says we keep spending more and more money on admin staff to manage the queues. We have more and more queues. So now we have more managers and admin staff than doctors, nurses, surgeons and beds. And Barry says when you visit a major hospital at weekends, the staff car parks are generally empty. The work schedule needs to be changed. This hysterical excuse of a right to family life at weekends does not wash, says Barry. Well, we will return to that, but in the last couple of minutes, I want to get an answer from Jonny and from Reem to the fundamental question: are car headlights too bright? Jonny?
Yes, they are. And of course, when you go over a speed hump, you get that massive flash as well. So, as usual, regulation is behind the free market. So, yes, we need to dip those new headlights.
Reem, when was the last time you were flashed?
Oh, God, Peter. I actually can't drive, to be fair.
Yeah. You can't drive?
I can't drive. I'm going to start driving lessons this year. It's my New Year's resolution.
And when you have a car, is it going to have reasonable headlights or not?
I hope so. I think that whoever sent this message in is absolutely right, and this is a really important issue.
It's in the Sunday Times today. There are people who are getting much brighter lights. There's a black market.
I think there's a bit of competition, isn't it? It's like, I've got brighter headlights than you. Look at me.
Yes.
I think there's a bit of...
How bright are your headlights, Jonny?
Well, they're Fiat, and they're very 10s, not 20s. But do you remember in Belgium when you went on holiday, you used to have to put yellow headlight covers over your car? Yes.
Why is that? Okay.
Well, in the olden days, you used to be able to show yourself yellow. Very unpleasant colour, actually.
I love yellow. Yellow is my favourite
on headlights.
Yeah, you like your Fiat. You're happy.
I like to flash a bit. as a courtesy.
I have someone as a courtesy, just keep everyone interested. I have a friend actually who had a terrible Fiat many years ago. It was very unreliable, and he called it the Fiat worse than death. So there we are. Thanks everybody on this. Rupert in London says the big problem in built-up areas is that there's so many speed humps, raised zebra crossings, etc., that vehicles coming towards you are constantly doing the equivalent of flashing a high beam with a super bright LEDs. And James says, I now use a pair of yellow tinted driving glasses because I find them so bright. That's James in Nebworth. Well, listen, thank you on the debate desk today, Jonny Gould and Reem Ibrahim. Of course, Jonny, a broadcaster, Reem, comms officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs.